Okay. Hello.
Hello.
I can edit any of this, by the way. So
Yes,
if you want
but
to say any more secrets.
the secrets? Well, besides the bank account information that you just got me to spill, I don't know that I have anything else.
No nuclear codes.
They don't trust me with those yet.
All right. I'll
The
wait a few
the
months.
the trans movement has certainly gotten its fingers all the way into the nuclear weapons of our country, but because I'm one of these dissident voices, they don't let me have the codes. They're setting up a plan to nuke Turf Island, though. They're just waiting for a big conference to draw all the radical feminists from all over the world there, and then those codes. You're gonna see a misfire of a missile, and it's gonna head straight to England.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh
Yeah.
no. Well, I'll have to put out the alert J.K. Rowling bat signal to
Yes.
stop your dastardly trans plot.
Yeah, it's a Quidditch player on one of the fancy brooms.
We do have a Harry Potter store in New York City now that I've been to, so
Oh, I should visit you and we can protest it together.
can we throw paint on it or something? No, it's a lot of fun. You can drink. Have you had the butter beer?
No.
It's really good.
I have to confess something.
What is it?
Once I got to the fourth Harry Potter book, I was like, I don't need to read any more of these.
I'm ending this interview right now. Just kidding.
Yeah. I know she is the saint of the gender critical movement now, Saint Teresa. But yeah, her books are for kids, and I just wasn't getting anything out of them anymore.
Yeah, I was kind of the perfect age for those books. I can't remember how old I was when the last one came out, but I was like a similar age to the characters, which I think is the ideal way to read them, because they kind of develop in complexity from like a 10-year-old to a 17-year-old or something. I don't know. I always liked them a lot. They were not my absolute favorite book series as a child. That was Series of Unfortunate Events, but pretty good. Pretty good, very cozy. But I could see how they would not be as appealing if you were even like a little bit older.
Nevertheless, a lot of adults of my age were reading those books at the time. And I believe that there are young adult fans of all ages even now. So I think that category, even though it's called young adult fiction, I believe that there are a lot of people of all ages that enjoy it. But
it's perhaps
those are people who identify as being young adults. I don't know.
It's true. That's very possible. And I think someone's felt sense of self is, after all, the most important thing.
Yes. Second to their immutable biological traits, which are the only things by which we should judge a person and their personality.
Well, now that we've gotten that out of the way,
right?
I think today I wanted to talk with you about a topic that has been sort of, percolating on Twitter lately, which is therapy and gender therapy. So there's a couple of really good therapists who do a podcast called Gender Wider Lens. Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayed. Have you ever listened to them?
I have listened to probably 5 or 6 episodes, and I am trying to stay current with their new episodes, but there's a lot to follow, and
there really is.
Yeah, the one this week I think is about parents who disagree. I haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, I'm not caught up either, but I've really enjoyed what I've listened to about them. And I think both of us have had experiences of Well, I bring it up because their thing is they're like talking about gender through a wider lens, which is, I think, instead of like a face value, like identifying as trans is always because you have the trait of being trans, which is a immutable, knowable thing that just means you are trans. They are sort of like, okay, is there something underlying this? Can this be like connected to some other like root, like trauma or anxiety, or like can this be like a coping mechanism for something else? And how do you explore that in therapy, which is very controversial, often called conversion therapy by people who disagree with this kind of approach, as opposed to affirmative therapy, which is basically, if you think you're trans, and it's not appropriate to like explore underlying causes. But I wanted to talk with you about it because I think both of us have had experiences with therapists and talking about gender with therapists, and probably been unsatisfied or had ways that we thought it could be different. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the uses and limitations of therapy for exploring your gender identity.
And we're doing this as people who are on the receiving end, not on the giving end.
That's true.
So anything that we say should not be construed as therapeutic advice.
No.
Right. And just because we sound like experts because we're so smart does not mean that we are.
Mm-hmm.
We're just lay people.
Yes, it's true. And in response to some criticism I've received on Twitter, I want to say I'm not trying to say that every single person who goes to gender therapy has the exact same experience as me or Corinna. So,
right.
Now that we've gotten that out of the way.
That's right. Some people have found the mystical gender gurus who do figure everything out accurately and guide them like angels along the path to appropriate medical transition.
Yes. And while we wish them well on their happy journey, some of us have had a little bit of a bumpier path.
Yes, I might present a complaint or two.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm trying to think how to start out this topic. May I start with an anecdote?
Oh, please.
All right. So I was just reading. No, I don't want to talk about that. Sorry. So I went to a therapist when I had thought I was thinking, I think I'm trans and I think I want to transition. So I went to a therapist who was like, when we talked on the phone, she was like, well, I'm not just a gender therapist, but I have worked with like LGBT people and trans people. Does that sound like I will meet your needs? And I was like, yeah, sure, sounds good. And I went to her and I told her I was questioning my gender and I was thinking about transitioning. And I remember very clearly that she said like, oh, you should buy a binder and like see what that, see how that feels. So I bought a binder and I started binding my breasts. And looking back on that, I feel kind of strange about it because I think buying a binder is kind of like the initiatory, like one of the initiatory things that you start trying out as like a female to male questioning gender person.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it was a little bit of a weird suggestion because like there are serious disadvantages to binders. Like they they crush your ribs in and then they make it hard to breathe. And on a more psychological level, I think that I can really clearly see that once I started binding, I became much more dissociated about my breasts and much more dysphoric when I had the binder off.
More committed.
So and more committed, which is to say sort of, it was like, I think the word is like, it got worse. Like my dysphoria got worse from binding. And I guess at the time I was like, well, it gets worse until it gets better. Like, now I'm like unearthing my real transness. But in retrospect, I think I wish she hadn't recommended that. And of course, I made the choice, but I do feel that therapists have a certain, they're kind of putting themselves in like a trusted counselor role. So I was sort of like, all right, this is a good idea. And now I don't know if it was. In fact, I don't think it was.
But it was your choice, Grace.
Mm-hmm. It was my choice.
I believe that this video has made the rounds well enough that anybody who's watching this current one has maybe seen it. And I wouldn't be surprised if it gets removed from the YouTubes before too long. But there is a male to female transitioner who's possibly detransitioning or has already detransitioned, who is confronting their current therapist, gender therapist. And the core of it is that this person who's recording their therapist is saying, you did not help me. None of these other gender therapists have helped me. You have led me down the primrose path.
Mm-hmm.
The whole time you're not helping me. You are instead encouraging me to make deeper and deeper commitments to a delusion. And that delusion is that I am a member of the opposite sex. And that you have not helped me, but you have only harmed me. One of it's like a 40-minute video. So there's a lot of circular exchanges happening. But the most poignant part of that confrontation to me is when the therapist is trying to defend herself. And what she says is that so many of the people who have seen her are grateful to her because she has cleared the way for them to have medical transition, and that she casts herself as the recipient of their gratitude. To me, that illuminates a really important factor of why gender therapists are doing what they're doing, and that is because they are receiving a personal benefit. They are like, I don't know, they're like the sorting hat, the Harry Potter sorting hat. You're actually a girl. Everybody, this is actually a girl. Ignore the penis.
So good to hear that.
Yes, so they are in a position of power,
Mm-hmm.
and that they are the philosopher's stone or whatever magical element there is to transform the boy into a girl or vice versa. They see themselves as being the crux of that choice.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the sort of affirmation gender therapist toolkit or whatever, it seems like the act of affirming someone as their gender identity. Sorry, I got distracted by your cute cat. The act of affirming someone as their gender identity is itself supposed to be therapeutic. So, it's like, they're like, okay, like the more we affirm you, the better you'll feel. But in that
Right.
video where that person was confronting their therapist, they were like, I needed other kinds of help, and you just like didn't look at anything else. And this is a problem. This is a direct conflict with the affirmation model, which is you're not supposed to look into underlying causes. You're like not supposed to prioritize anything over the gender exploration. I mean, of course, I don't know how every gender therapist does it. I think there are like different ones, but you can see sort of definitely a current in terms of things like, I don't know, interviews with like the kind of stuff that Dr. Jack Turbin says, or like, I think there's a like coterie of therapists who like signed a pledge to be like, we will give you your surgery letter in one
Yes.
meeting. We will not ask any questions. So
or
there's
the ones that I'm impressed by, Grace, sorry for interrupting, but
Oh.
the non-binary and or trans-identified therapists who I would be very surprised if somebody who identifies as trans is going to be able to provide any sort of therapy to somebody who is exploring their gender without actually just affirming them and pushing them into the path further.
Hmm. And this is where we really get into a conflict when we hear, testimony from like detransitioners or, people who are realizing like I needed a different kind of help. And I sort of was, figuring things out the best that I could at the time. But the gender explanation was like it was like an explanation that I thought was true and it seemed like it would make things better, but it actually didn't help and I didn't get the help I needed. You know, I have really mixed feelings about the whole mental health institution and therapists in general. Like I don't think they have magical powers to look into people's heads. Uh, but there's a continuum of different kinds of ways that therapists can approach patients' problems. And on one extreme end is total incuriosity and like just affirmation of like, okay, you think you're trans and all your problems come from that? Sounds good. Here's your surgery letter. And if that is considered the only non transphobic surgery, then people who have underlying conditions causing their gender dysphoria that would be better served by other kinds of treatment are just not going to get that. And that's just, I think a lot of people are just like, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But I feel really worried about that because it's often not people who are like, oh, everything's fine and I'm just doing this on a whim. Like that's kind of the stereotype, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's usually people who have like already have some serious problems and like struggles and often like trauma, and then are, going to have to add, I don't know, detransition or like surgery regret on top of that, which is a humongous deal.
Yeah. So let me set up a little fact pattern here.
Mhm.
Let's take somebody who was born male and is currently in their early 40s and is married, has a couple of kids, and is seeing a therapist because they think they might be transgender. They've been cross-dressing for most of their adult lives,
Mhm.
and they thought for a long time they were just a cross-dresser, but they've been researching a lot on the internet, and now they think they're transgender.
Mhm.
And they go to see a therapist for this, right? And this person is maybe uh, somebody who came from a home with, let's say, two alcoholic parents that fought a lot. And this adult male now has had to have some couples counseling because maybe that background of not having nurturing parents made it difficult for him to have any sort of uh, being a good supporting partner, right? So let's imagine this person.
Mhm.
So he goes to his therapist because he thinks he might be transgender. And they sit down and they have a couple of sessions. And what his therapist is realizing is that he still has some unresolved issues from his own childhood of having these alcoholic parents, and that he's developed some sort of avoidant behaviors, and that she thinks that maybe what was a fixation or a kink, a paraphilia with cross-dressing, has been allowed to unspool and is starting to take over other aspects of his personality, which, and this therapist believes that that's really just because he's avoiding dealing with these unresolved traumas.
Mhm.
And she tells him this, and that this is now the opposite of what he wants to hear, because really what he wanted was for somebody to affirm this transgender identification.
Mm-hmm.
So from this therapist's point of view, if she doesn't affirm him, she's going to lose him as a client. So she has a financial interest in retaining him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one conflict that exists now. Another conflict is that she might realize perfectly that he has these other issues that he needs to work through, and that if she allows him to explore, not allows, because he can do whatever he wants, but if she works with him to explore his transgender identity, then maybe she feels like she could help him simultaneously work through these other more influential aspects of these unresolved traumas. So maybe if she can keep him on the line, right, keep him coming to her, maybe
Yeah.
she feels like she can still do some good.
Yeah.
So there's another conflict, because even if she doesn't think that it's helpful to transition, maybe she still thinks that she can be the person to help him work through these other issues. But no matter what, with this little, fact pattern I've laid out here, you have a therapist who can't really deliver the therapy that might actually help this person the most.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a person who doesn't want to receive the therapy that might help him the most.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got two sides of this that don't want to do the thing that is necessarily going to help the person the most.
Yeah. I think that's a really good example of the dynamic that's going on with a lot of people who are seeking gender therapy. I was reading Gender Dysphoria, this book on gender dysphoria by Sue and Marcus Evans, I think. And there was a case study of a client who was like a 23-year-old male person who was seeking transition. And it was kind of that exact situation. Well, no, it was not that exact situation, but it was a situation where this person had like family trauma, and but had gone in and had like a very uncurious affect and was not interested in talking about any of this stuff, and was just like, well, I figured it out, like I'm going to transition, and that's going to help everything, and what else is there to talk about, and just was kind of like, no, everything's fine, and was not interested in talking about the past and not interested in exploring downsides of transition or anything like that. And the authors made a comparison to the way that people who are going to commit suicide will start to be sort of like cheerful and carefree, because they're like, what does it matter? I'm going to be gone. But instead, in this case, it was like, well, what does it matter? I'm about to just be like changed into a woman. And then
Right.
what's the point? So I think that, you're right that it's like, yeah, no one wants to explore things. The therapists don't want to explore things. The patients do not want to explore things. I think we have like a trans folk culture that's like, if your therapist wants to explore things, that's a red flag and that's conversion therapy and you got to get out of there. So yeah, it's not surprising nothing gets explored.
The trans community, such as it is, does not want its members exploring either.
No.
If you explore, I think that's called, there's a word for it, internalized trans misogyny or
That's right.
internalized transphobia. That's
Yeah.
that questioning whether you are authentically trans is a form of self-hatred.
Yes, I think that if you go back through my transition video diaries, you can hear me rationalizing away doubts with the internalized transphobia. idea.
Right. And
Did you?
it's transphobic. It's self-directed transphobia if you wonder whether you'll be happier if you remove your breasts or remove your testicles and penis. That's a form of self-hatred to have doubt about that sort of thing.
Right.
So let me ask a difficult question.
Yeah.
Is that all right? Did you want to go
Mhm.
somewhere else? Because I have a really hard question.
No, I'm ready. Let's get
Okay.
real.
So are you in therapy?
No.
So do you think that I'm not either, so let me put that out there. Do you think that we have some unresolved traumas of our transition that ought to be addressed in therapy? See, it's a hard question.
You mean instead of m- transphobically venting our spleen on YouTube where people will see it and draw conclusions?
Yeah,
That's
that seems unhealthy. If I were you, I wouldn't be using these public channels and seeking any form of validation or response in the comments as a substitute for therapy.
um yeah, be that as it may, I am prejudiced against therapists now.
Hmm.
I don't I don't really want to. I mean, I would be open to seeing one again, and I even have thought about it lately just because I've, I don't know, been thinking so much about my detransition and it's kind of painful.
Hmm.
Um, but unresolved traumas. I went to therapy for a while directly to deal with transition trauma, because I was having trouble functioning after top surgery. Like I couldn't, I was like crying every night and like just like couldn't really function. And I was like, I think that like my fiance was like, having to sort of take care of me all the time. And I was sort of like, all right, I need to figure out how to get something else going. So I did see a therapist for a little while about that. And we did a kind of trauma therapy. And I feel, if I don't really know what trauma means, but we did do a therapy that's for trauma that seemed to help me. But I noticed that after I got over the worst of my feelings, I just didn't really feel like opening up to a therapist about anything else. Like I don't feel like I trust therapists anymore. Um, so I don't know, it's hard to say because there's definitely still a lot of like painful things to think about, but I don't know that I just don't know how I would find a therapist that I could trust. I don't know. Do you ever think about going to therapy to talk through transition feelings?
No, I'm completely well adjusted and I don't have any of that internalized trans misogyny. I'm totally good. Totally good. Uh, okay, so seriously, I have seen a therapist on 2 occasions after transition. One is so my father is passed away like 20 years ago, and then my mother had a chronic illness, and she's still dealing with it. But at the time that it first came on, she was going through a very very rough patch, and it seemed like she wasn't going to recover from it. So I saw a therapist because I was experiencing grief,
Mhm.
and it was a form of grief that I had never heard any of my friends or peers talking about, which is it's like the grief of losing a family member who's still alive, because you're kind of like constantly on edge, thinking that they could pass away, and when that goes on for like 6 months, it's extremely grueling
Mhm.
because it's like this constant imminent event,
Yeah.
which she recovered from, so that's good. Uh, but I saw a therapist to help manage that grieving process, and she often wanted to explore the gender stuff with me in a way that was probably, from her point of view, it was necessary because there's probably a lot of integrated type of things happening, because my transition is a super important part of my relationship with my mom, and my grieving for her was also obviously due to the fact that we know each other. We met in the 70s when I was born, and we've stayed close for most of that time. So those two things were probably tangled up to some degree. But a lot of the things that she and I talked about were more related to my apathy towards transition, because she was seeing other trans patients who she believed, including children, who she believed she was helping. And my impression, I don't know what was going on in her head, but my impression, Grace, is that she didn't want me to feel apathetic about transitioning, because that was disillusioning her of the work that she was doing with her other patients.
Yeah.
Like, she wanted to fix the things that I was disillusioned about.
You felt like she was trying to help you feel like happy and enchanted about your transition
Yes,
again.
yes.
Did you feel grateful for that attempted intervention?
I did not feel grateful, and what I was feeling at the time was that I had a duty or a responsibility to try to disenchant her or to disillusion her, because she seemed to believe that, you know, she was the gender sorting hat, that she could get people to, revel in their true selves. And there, I'm at the point in thinking that the whole construct of an authentic self is sort of foolish and not helpful. And I stopped seeing her after she had helped me develop some tools for dealing with grief.
Mhm.
And I wasn't getting anything else from the therapy, because it was uh, just ending up with her wanting to talk about why I wasn't happy with transition.
Can I ask you something
Yeah.
that I am familiar with your reasoning for this, but just because I think that it's important to like, say for people, like you you've said you're wanting to like disillusion your therapist.
Yes.
Why is that so important to you? If it's making people happy and if they're being what they see as their true self, what's wrong with that?
That is a fantastic question. And it's hard for me to really frame it without sounding like I'm uh, thinking of myself as being some sort of high school or college philosophy coffee drinker at 3 a.m. in the morning. Like, because
Mhm.
more or less, I don't have the background or the education to really talk about this as somebody who knows what they're talking about really means. But what I've learned about life thus far in my 29 years on this planet is that you are constantly changing. The people who you meet change you. The troubles that you run into change you. The achievements that you attain change you. And that there's no static individual, except for maybe somebody who's prepared to face their own death, which also changes you.
Mhm.
And that since you are constantly changing and that you are constantly being changed, the idea of an authentic self is really daft. There isn't an authentic self. There is a running away from parts of yourself, but there's not like this concrete foundation of who a person is. There's just sort of this bed of this sort of fluid bed of who you are, and that's constantly shifting around. Like these, they're like tectonic plates. You
Mm-hmm.
have a set of tectonic plates underneath you, but it's shifting. It's constantly shifting. So the idea of discovering your authentic self to me is just a waste of time. Um, you can trim away the parts that are false, but you're never going to get to something that is wholly just one image.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the part about disillusionment. When therapists believe that they're helping somebody become their true self, and that person seems really happy, that is a snapshot of a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
That is what that person looks like at a local maximum. They are, and by that I mean if you look at a graph and it's has a couple of bumps in it, if you're really focused in on a short time frame, it looks like there's something that sort of peaks.
Mm-hmm.
And if your window is very small, it looks like things are going really, really positively.
Mm-hmm.
But you keep adding experiences to that person's life, and that graph might start to really dip down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these therapists are seeing people whose brains are being rewired from hormones, that those people want their brains to be rewired from hormones, and they're getting what they want. When you get what you want, that makes you happy or euphoric.
Mm-hmm.
And these therapists are taking these mental pictures of people at the very peak of their happy experience with transition, and that the therapists are saying this is the best outcome, is people who are so happy at this very moment, and they don't want
Mm-hmm.
to expand that window to see whether things keep going up or whether things level off or go down or gradually decline. For me, that graph sort of dipped down for a while and leveled off, and I'm okay with where I'm at. But I'd like therapists to know that that peak happiness, that gender euphoria that they're seeing, is not sustainable. it's not the emergence of anybody's true self. It is just somebody who's reveling in the accomplishment of having the thing that they fantasized about without really fully having to yet deal with the consequences of it. It's like if you won the lottery, you'd be super happy that you won the
Mm-hmm.
lottery. And if you look at the lives of most people who win the lottery, it's not so rosy.
Yeah. I think I think that's really well said. Um, and I know you have a complicated set of feelings about your transition. You're not you're not a detransitioner like me per se, but um, anyone who's watching this, Corinna has written a really beautiful personal essay that you can find in Quillette about sort of going through a phase of euphoria and feeling like you've really become a woman. And then as you grow a little older, you realize that, like, there are some things that transition hasn't changed and some things that you had to, sort of come to terms with and accept about yourself just as part of your maturation as a person. And it's a really beautiful essay. So everyone should read it. Um, and I think therapists should know that the initial euphoria is not like, it's not a sustained state, and it doesn't necessarily represent people's lives actually getting better over the long term. Like, you know, none of us can know what our lives would be like if things had been different. Like I was very deeply depressed when I decided to transition, and transition gave me hope and a way forward. And I needed something to give me that. So in that way, it was good for me. However, I have no breasts now. And as I get a little older, start thinking about maybe having kids, that I have started to feel a really deep regret, because I realized, like, not only has this affected me and caused me problems, but now, like, I won't be able to breastfeed my future children, which, I know that there's other ways you can do it, but just the sorry.
No,
But
I get it.
yeah, the consequences are profound. So, you know, I think therapists should know that. And I think that people who are thinking about transitioning should try to think about that. And I have to be honest and say, I don't know that I would have been receptive to hearing this sort of thing when I was transitioning. Like, I don't really know that our message of the magic and happiness of transition is transient and doesn't last. I don't know that anyone wants to hear that. I don't think it's a very popular message, but I think it is something that people have to deal with. Um, and I think it would at least be good if therapists who are, again, assigning themselves a role of kind of like gender gurus would keep that in mind.
I agree with you. When I was 17, 18, before I'd had any medical interventions, I knew with perfect clarity that I was going to transition,
Mm-hmm.
and that if I had seen a video of a 29-year-old person like myself, I'm 46 now, if I'd seen a video of a middle-aged person saying, transition is, I'm ambivalent about transition,
Mm-hmm.
I would have said, well, that's you, but that's not going to be me.
That's not going to be me. Just because you didn't think things through all the way doesn't
Right.
mean that I don't have it figured out.
And I definitely would have been one of those kids going, what, that's tragic for you. And I can definitely tell what a tragic and pathetic figure you are,
Uh-huh.
but that's not going to be me.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know that? Is it because you're so excited about transition?
Yes, because I know all of these people around me are telling me how beautiful I am. And that beauty that I have at 19 is certainly going to carry me all the way through. I'm going to look as beautiful at age 32 when I'm expected to die, right? That's my life expectancy. That I'm going to look as good at 32 as I do at 19, and that everybody's going to admire me, and that blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm going to be 46 years old and contemplating whether I should buy my copy of TurboTax now or whether I should wait until March 14th, or April 14th. I'm the quotidian dull activities, everyday activities. It's not something that I was thinking about when I was 19. I was thinking about I wanted to be beautiful, and I wanted to be admired, and I wanted to be accepted, and I wanted that the objects of my affection would be attracted to me as well. And it's the sort of stupid things that you think about, because that's what happens when your brain is still cooking.
Yeah. And those, it's a very powerful drive. And
Hmm.
it is kind of an exciting, I, I don't mean to like sweep the fun parts of transition under the rug. Like, it sure is a rush at the time.
Yes.
uh, you know, but I know, ultimately, the high doesn't last. And as the song from Hedwig and the Angry Inch goes, you wake up and turn back to yourself like over and over again throughout your life. That ever changing tectonic plates psychological situation just keeps shifting around mercilessly. So it's just not all getting groomed by strangers on the internet and having the excitement of your first surgery appointment, is it?
Nope. I'm thinking about a little bit about who might be watching this video.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably 3 camps. So one camp is trans people who are out seeking, trans or detrans people, sorry, I'm just lumping everybody in that category, who are seeking some form of affirmation that they aren't the only ones that are having thoughts like this. They're looking for people like you and I to maybe articulate these things
Mm-hmm.
or add some dimension to them to help them sort of scaffold their own thinking. That would be one group. Another
Mm-hmm.
group would be therapists or other care providers who are seeking another point of view or a more critical point of view to contrast with some of the things that are happening in their field. And the third group of people have no horse in the race. They are not receiving gender care or any sort of therapy for gender issues. They are not giving any sort of care. They are just on the sidelines somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you could pick which, first of all, do you agree that that's probably a useful way of grouping who's watching?
That sounds right.
Okay. Of those 3 groups, if you could absolutely influence one of those 3 groups, which group would you want to influence?
Oh, I'm that's a fraught question for someone who's been accused of being a sinister ideological detransitioner smuggling transphobic ideology into the mainstream. But let me
Yes.
take it seriously. Definitely. Well, I think that this video is about well, let me explain my thinking. I'm having trouble deciding, and let me tell you why.
Hmm.
Therapists, I see therapists as having a sort of level of responsibility, a professional level of responsibility to take transition and its downsides seriously and to understand that and to not just be kind of like blowing glitter at people and being like, yes, this is so awesome. Like, there's no downsides. Don't worry about it. Like, I think that it's not just like they should think about that because they're people with brains. I think they have a professional duty to know about these sorts of things and be curious about these sorts of things. So for that reason, I would like therapists to watch this video. But the thing about therapy that I think you talked about earlier is like obviously therapists guide people and they're in a trusted role. And I think people take their advice seriously. But obviously therapists don't literally like control people's behavior. And I think that a huge part of why people have unrealistic expectations about transition is not because first from gender therapy, like they heard it first from gender therapists. I think it's because they heard it first online from the trans community, you know, not like every single trans person, but like, you know, there's tons of material online that is a completely one-sided, like hyped up view of how great transition is. And people are really easily able to saturate themselves in this kind of material in a really one-sided way. And I think that people kind of would benefit from hearing this perspective too. I don't know, again, like would either of us have listened to this? maybe not. But if somehow people could listen to it, I think that would be beneficial in providing people with some context. So I have mixed feelings for those reasons. There's the professional responsibility and the trusted role of therapist versus like the fact that people are individuals who sort of, in the end, just weigh things and make their own decisions. I don't know. What do you think?
One of the things that I wish was possible when I was transitioning would be, and I think that this is in the realm of possibility. This could have happened, even as stuck as I was on this vision of transitioning. I wish that my therapist had gotten me to slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that if this influences anybody's thinking, that it influences therapists who are seeing gender affirmation seeking patients to consider all of the dimensions of the choices that they're contemplating. One thing that my therapist never asked me, and that we never explored, was, what if your surgery goes badly? Your eyes just popped. You never got a question like that either, I bet.
No.
But don't you think that that's something that anybody who's having any sort of surgery, but especially something that's going to permanently sterilize you in my case, and certainly affect your ability to have healthy intercourse with another person? That seems like the sort of question a therapist probably should explore
Mm-hmm.
before they write a letter for approving surgery, right?
Did you have a therapist write a letter approving surgery?
I had to have 2 letters at the time that I had surgery. There wasn't WPATH back then. It was the former thing.
The Benjamin something.
Yeah. The Benjamin
Yeah.
Boyce Standards of Care.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, and you transitioned in the 90s, is that right?
I did.
Which was considered a much harsher time
It
for
was.
like gatekeeping. So no one asked what will happen. Well, like, what's your plan? Do you have a plan?
Yeah.
You were 18, 19?
Yeah, 18 and 19.
You were 18 and okay, so you were a teen.
I was 18 when I had my appointment for surgery.
So you were going in as a, a teenager, barely legal adult,
Yeah.
and your therapist was not.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't
working with
describe
you to
myself
make.
as barely legal. I think
Sorry.
that carries other implications.
I don't know why I said that.
Because I'm trans, and you thought that I was no, I'm just kidding.
Barely legal. Sorry. Oh God, we gotta cut this. No. It's
It is some much needed levity.
wow. This is We've had a lot of fun here today talking about lots of our fertility and body parts. No, but
Yes.
it's true. It's like, I'm trying to think of a corollary. Like this is something I think about a lot. There's people love to analogize transition to different things. Like people
Yes.
have said, you talking about your transition regret is like someone talking about their abortion regret in a way that's meant to cause people to outlaw abortion. They're like, you're just doing something like that. Or they're like,
Yeah.
exploring, therapists who like have you try to explore underlying causes of your gender identity. That's like conversion therapy.
Yes.
People analogize, and now I can't say it. They make it, they act like they're sort of like, this is like this. This is like this. It's like this.
Yeah.
It's like this. But
could I interrupt for just 1 second here?
yeah.
Because what I want to say is that there are some very insecure people who can't imagine how we would ever have a middle road solution So the only thing that they can think of are extremes because they're too insecure and too immature to imagine that there are outcomes that are not extremes. And I just want to throw that in there.
It's true.
But sorry, please continue.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. People a lot are like, so why do you want all transition to be banned? It's like, I don't.
Right.
Anyway, but you know, there are different kinds of ways that things are therapeutically explored, and you know, transition is in the DSM. Gender dysphoria is in the DSM. I know a lot of people think it shouldn't be, but it is. And people, you know, there are other conditions in the DSM that are explored with certain like therapeutic frameworks. For example, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and to be diagnosed with this, I had to do a battery of tests. And for a while, I was not allowed to go on stimulant medication because I had an eating disorder and was underweight. And they said, it looks like you have this complicating psychological factor. And if you go on these stimulants that reduce your appetite, we're worried about you. We're worried that this is going to have, you know, that there's this other thing going on that's going to, you know, interact badly. So, you know, was that, you know, medical paternalism that was unnecessary and perhaps misogynist, or, you know, was that a good thing? I don't know. Like, I think it's probably good I wasn't on methamphetamines when I had an eating disorder in college. So I don't know. People, you know, there are middle of the road solutions. There are different ways to do things, and I think that the way that therapists treat transition is just very unlike other conditions.
Well, I'm getting a text message here from the transgender cabal saying that there's a meeting happening right this moment about whether or not I'm going to get the codes for the nukes.
Oh,
So I might have to go. I might have to go advocate for myself here in a minute.
All right, sounds good. Well, I've enjoyed talking with you about gender therapy. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you will do your best to sway the cabal of transgender overlords who are trying to nuke Turf Island, because Harry Potter came from there. Come on.
It did, and we don't even know who wrote it.
That's right. She who must not be named.
That's right. Grace, I really appreciated this conversation. I know
I really appreciated it too.
we have things like this sometimes that are not recorded, where we actually feel free to use sarcasm, unlike today where we really reeled it in. And if we talk again, I would love to have more discussions with you about how we use sarcasm and humor to deal with what are actually very deep psychic wounds. But
we both I like that we both defensively laughed at deep psychic wounds.
That's right.
As if it viewed as deep psychic wounds. That's hilarious.
That is. But
sorry, I woke up like that.
Right. So yeah, I think there's lots of really interesting discussions we could share with other people, but I really appreciated this one.
All right, thank you, my dear friend, and I'll talk to you another time soon, I hope.
All right.
All right.